Spoke Radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
All right, good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke Radio for the masses. Yeah, man, how you doing? Let's do that. It's Monday, February 17th, 2020. 48 days into the new year, only 324 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south. Far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? Kicking off another great week here on Fade to Black. We're going to do that tonight, starting with Paul Hynek. Paul Hynek is here. Oh, man. Looking forward to this, and I know you are too. And tomorrow night, it's going to be a special night because tomorrow night I'm speaking here in Los Angeles over at UPARS LA. That's going down in Studio City. So Fade to Black is taking the night off, but we will be live streaming from the event. So you'll have that to look forward to tomorrow night. And if you're going to miss the live stream, and I think we're going to hit it off. We're going to do everything. It'll be Twitter, Periscope, YouTube, and Facebook. I believe we're going to live stream to all of the platforms tomorrow night. And if you're not there for that and you're here, then you'll be listening to this show tomorrow night, the replay. So that's tomorrow night. And then Wednesday night, we have Steve Mera joining us live from the United Kingdom. And it's always great when Steve is with us. We've got lots to talk about, and that'll be happening on Wednesday night. And, of course, Thursday is another Fader night. Email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Tonight, Paul Hynek. Very excited about this. Paul has worked in tech and entertainment and is currently a business consultant. Paul is the former adjunct professor at Pepperdine University and is presently a consultant for History's new series Project Blue Book, based on a real project to investigate UFOs from 1952 to 1969. Of course, Paul is the son of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer who worked for the United States Air Force investigating UFO cases from 1948 all the way to the end of Project Blue Book in 1969. Dr. J. Allen Hynek began his investigation with the United States Air Force as a skeptic, but by the time Blue Book ended, he was convinced some UFO cases posed a real mystery. And I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, Paul Hynek. Paul, good evening, man. How are you?
Thank you. It's great to be here. I may be the son of J. Allen Hynek, but I'm also the friend of Jimmy Church.
You know what? You know what rocks, Paul? I get to, right now, give you the first-time guest disclaimer. Right? So let's get that out of the way. This is an honor. Paul, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends, and where the conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. There you go. You ready, man? Okay.
All right.
Now, I'm actually going to start here. I've been watching, and I've been getting email. I've been watching social media and my text and in email. There's a lot of excited people out there listening, right, for tonight's show. Paul is cool. Jimmy's cool. This is going to be great. It's going to be amazing. And I'm thinking, Paul, that maybe we should call it quits now while we're ahead of the game, and let's you and I meet halfway since we're neighbors. Let's just go to a restaurant tonight and have dinner and save ourselves. What do you think?
Okay, we'll go to public school in Sherman Oaks.
Oh, man, my daughters went to public school in Sherman Oaks.
Awesome.
That is, not only did they go to school next door to the restaurant, but that restaurant is top notch. I like where you're going with that.
Yes, sir.
Oh, man. All right, here we go. Tonight, I have to ask the one question because you and I are the same age. And I can only imagine what it was like for you, or maybe I can't, growing up in the first family of UFO research. And was this something that you were cognizant of, going to school, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade in the 60s? And did your friends know? Because this gave you street cred, I can only imagine.
Yeah, well, however you grow up is normal to you until you get some outside vantage point to sort of compare it to. I mean, I thought that everybody had Christmas tree ornaments that were UFOs and Bet's sphere balls and paintings on the wall of abductions. That just seemed normal to me. And yeah, my friends thought it was super cool that our dad was I'm one of 5 kids. Right. They thought it was super cool that our dad was an astronomer and then, doing sort of a side hustle working with UFOs.
I like that terminology, side hustle. Was that because how did you feel that your father was approaching it? Was it discussed at the dinner table? Was this, family discussion? I mean, I talked to my dad about his job all the time. Did you do the same thing?
Heck yeah. Wouldn't anybody? I mean, your dad is studying one of the biggest mysteries in the history of the world. Is there life elsewhere? And, asterisk, has it come here? So we were fascinated by it. And he would bring it home literally with case files and witnesses having dinner at our house. I remember Father Gill, one of my favorite cases of all time from Papua New Guinea in 1959, coming to dinner at our house. And he was such a good witness because he wasn't really that interested in popularizing his case. And he was in town for an ecumenical conference because he was an Anglican minister. But if you come to the Hynek house for dinner and you've reported a UFO, the kind of quid pro quo is that you're going to have to fess up and talk about the UFO report again. So we had this all the time.
And what about your mom? Was she as engaged too as well, or was she busy being a mom and that was just her husband's job?
She got very engaged and became a leading figure in ufology in her own right. She was the editor of the International UFO Reporter, and without her, I think the Center for UFO Studies, which my father founded, likely would not have lasted more than a couple of years.
So, and what I'm trying to, and although we know about that aspect of your mom and of course your father, it's that how open was it, around the house with the family? And that, I think all of us are so intrigued by that. And I can only imagine what that must have been like. But you're suggesting here that you guys were full on flying saucer.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. I mean, this was, my father was a scientist, first and foremost. Right. And he did a lot of cool stuff in astronomy and astrophysics and rocket science. And this became something that I think when he was first approached by the Air Force, he thought that it would just be a couple weekends of work. I think he had no idea that it would turn into something that Jimmy Church would be interviewing his son about decades later.
Right.
So it was just, and it was very open. It was, you know, my father was a scientist, like I said, so we had lots of conversation. He encouraged, as did my mom, our interest in the world and science in particular, and to have an open, inquisitive mind. And since he was steeped, or they both were steeped in UFOs, that was just a ready-made subject for us to talk about.
And the bona fide flip side is this: there are those out there that believe, and strongly believe with conviction, that your father knew the real stuff. Right. I mean, aside from the public persona and the public side of this and what his beliefs were, it comes down to actual knowledge. And was that ever really discussed? I mean, did he ever say, okay, this is something I can't talk about, but I need to share it? Do you feel that your father was privy to information that still hasn't been disclosed today?
Well, we would go over really sensitive documents traditionally during Easter dinner at Area 51 as a family. So we were all privy to that. I kid.
Well, hold on. No, I don't think you are. And see, this is the thing. I have some documents here, not originals, of course, but I have some stuff from the Center of UFO Studies, and with your father's signature on it, and these different case files. And I look at those, and these are things that aren't public, but I think are some of the most fascinating, strongest cases. Did you do the same thing? Did you jump into the files and open up some filing cabinets and just start reading this stuff?
Yeah, and for a while, I have the honor, Jimmy, that my bedroom was the largest UFO library in the world. Now, that's not exactly what I wanted. I wanted, like, rock and roll posters on the wall. Right. But my mom was a pretty strong-willed, and that was family real estate, so to speak.
Now, I want to jump back to, God, man, I so want to be you. I want to jump back to the point that we just kind of blew by earlier. You said, I don't know if you were being facetious, you said you had paintings of alien abductions on the wall of your bedroom.
Yeah, we had, and I have one in my garage now of UFOs, but we had all kinds of stuff like that. And I mentioned the Betz sphere. That's from a famous case in Florida, and we may have had the actual Betz sphere because we had a very large cannonball-sized piece of steel that my father gave to my younger brother Ross and I, and we would just play with it in the basement. And I know that he had possession of the actual Betz sphere at one time, and I really can't think of any better place to put it than to not say anything about its origin.
Oh, we just lost Paul. Paul, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, yeah, you dropped out. You dropped out the last 20 seconds. Yeah.
That's censorship right there.
Yeah. See, are you used to it now? And let's go right there. The censorship on this issue, your father certainly, and you being part of the family, you guys were censored. Stories were changed, results were changed, things were edited, and it was something that certainly frustrated your dad. You experienced that firsthand. Has this been a lifelong situation with you where you've had to deal with one side, what you believed is the truth, and your father, and then the other side, the edited, sanitized version that the public read?
I'll answer that in two parts. First part, yes. I mean, I grew up in a culture of my father with a lifelong passion to take a flashlight to the dark fringes of mainstream science and push the boundaries of accepted thought just a little bit more. And that's why he was so attracted to UFOs after he realized that there really was a phenomenon there. The second part is given my big fat mouth, I wish I'd had more censorship in my life.
And how so? In that you feel that this is, freedom of speech, and this is an issue that you're going to speak freely about, but at times you've maybe stepped over the line?
Sure. I'm a little bit freewheeling.
I remember, and I mentioned this to you last week, but I went to a presentation of yours here in Los Angeles. It was at the MUFON Symposium, and I stood in the back of the room and listened to your presentation. And the one thing that I came away from, the information and all of that was great, but what I came away from your presentation with was, here's a guy that's just honest. Right? You're just putting it out there unfiltered, and you don't have a reason to hold back, and I don't think that you care. And is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, what do I have to hide? There's been, and people have different feelings about how much cover-up and conspiracy and disclosure-laden secrets there are tucked away in the bowels of the U.S. government. But this subject is cloaked in secrecy. So I don't have any secrets that I don't share, because what we need is much more sunlight upon this phenomenon. Right.
And can you spot the Fed? Right. Can you?
Well, they're often dressed in black. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. You must be acclimated to that. I mean, can you spot the Fed? Can you spot an agent?
That'd be a really cool video game, Spot the Fed. Yeah, the Men in Black was something that my father was aware of. And most often he wouldn't see them, but he would just sort of find the legacy of their presence by having witnesses he'd already talked to start to clam up, or people he'd just met be really curiously reticent to talk at all.
Did you ever walk out of your house and see, like the strange car across the street? I mean, were you trying to be cognizant of these things?
I didn't think about things like that so much. We had a number of crazy people come to the house, but I'm pretty sure they weren't in the employment of the U.S. government.
What am I supposed to do with that answer? What when you say crazy? Yeah, please expand.
So one of my favorites was Prince Michael. Prince Michael used to call and say he was from Orion, and somehow I picked up the phone and I'd start talking to the guy, and I said, "Look, I don't think you're from Orion. I think you're from the Pleiades, and you're making that stuff up." And he said, "You don't believe me, do you?" I said, "No, I think you're stone cold crazy, dude. I think you're nuts." And he says, "Okay, how about this? How about if I put $1 million in your bank account? Will you believe me then?" And I said, "You bet I will." And so I asked my mom, I'm like 12 years old at the time, "Hey, Mom, can I give him my bank account number?" And my mom said, "Yeah, why not? You got like all of $17 in there, sure." Like, "Yeah, Mom." So I gave him my bank account number, and he said, "The money will be in there in the next couple of days." And I rode my Schwinn fastback bike to the bank every day, so excited, spending every penny of that $1 million.
Sure.
And every day I cycled back home slowly and sullen and sad. And finally he called back like 4 days later. He said, "Did you get the money?" I said, "No, dude, you're nuts." And then he said, "Okay, I'll prove it to you. Call the CIA and they will tell you that they're afraid of me." And he gave me the number for the CIA. So I called them. And a woman picked up the phone. I said, "Hi, my name is Paul Hynek. I'm a red-blooded American. What I'm going to tell you is that of what I think is a crazy person, but there's a guy named Prince Michael who calls me on the phone, and he told me that you guys at the CIA are afraid of him." And the woman took a little breath and said, "Well, Paul, I'll tell you this. We're not losing a lot of sleep over it." I thought, cool, the CIA has a sense of humor. So Prince Michael calls back the next day, and he said, "Did you call them?" "Yes." "What'd they say?" I told him, and he said, "Well, you didn't expect them to really admit it, did you?" Like, oh, come on, man. So he was my personal favorite, but we had all kinds of characters come to the house. warning my dad of not traveling to areas with seismic activity, that tomorrow President Brezhnev or Premier Brezhnev of Russia, Soviet Union, and President Reagan will be hand-slaughtered on the steps of the Kremlin and the White House, respectively, and that he had a space wife who didn't know she was going to marry him yet, and on and on and on.
Did Prince Michael did you meet him in person?
No. Oh. Well, not that I know of, but he actually sounds a little bit like you, Jimmy, so I'm not too sure.
Well, you know what? I can promise you this. I don't have $1 million. So that won't be appearing in your bank account tomorrow. That part of it, there could be an Orion connection there, though. I wanted to ask you this. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, okay?
Yeah.
Now, again, you and I are the same age, so I know that you watched the movie the same time that I did for the first time. And at that age, at my age, when I saw it for the first time, it was a game changer. And now, but my dad wasn't in the movie. Yours was.
Right.
And
right.
How was that for the impact of that for the family and you personally? Let's actually start there. What was that like to go through, such a huge movie like that? And your father, even though briefly, for that one shot, but it was done with intention, right? What was the impact of the film?
Well, it was a super cool experience, and I met Spielberg during filming. I was used to what we were used to, my dad being on TV and radio quite a lot and having news crews come over and watching him on TV. So we're used to sort of that sort of production environment, but a feature film was different. And before the movie came out, my dad was both guardedly optimistic and a bit hesitant because Hollywood isn't always known for giving serious treatment to serious phenomena. So he wasn't quite sure about whether to get involved or not. But over the course of a lot of discussions with Steven Spielberg and the Phillips who produced it, he felt more and more comfortable. And he felt great about the movie once it came out because it gave a sympathetic portrayal to a wildly bizarre phenomenon. And one of the things that it really showcased was the sort of extra components of a UFO experience, as my father called his book, because it's not always merely sighting an object in the sky, but individuals report that they seem to have some type of communication as well, oftentimes. So once the movie came out and my dad was happy with it, it was great fun. It was a big movie at the time, and my father was very gratified that it turned out so well, and it was just a super cool experience to go see it. And we would go see it in various showings, and my father would speak at Northwestern and then do a showing. So it was just a whole lot of fun.
And then there's the other part about it, which is, and I'm on this side of the fence, by the way, that Close Encounters of the Third Kind, as entertaining as it is actually a documentary. Right? And you know where I'm going with this. So this is nothing new. But there is that aspect of it. Do you feel that Spielberg was in the know and this was something that was based on fact?
Well, it's certainly based on a lot of reports of UFOs. The really iconic scene of the UFOs going through the toll booth. That's from an actual case reported on the border between Ohio and Pennsylvania. So a lot of the things that happen in the movie are taken from actual reports.
And the fact that your father being in that one shot, and also, of course, Jacques Vallée being portrayed in the film, and his involvement, that this, we go back to street cred, right? That this is a way to validate this fictional presentation by Spielberg. There is that twist on it, and you can't get away from that conspiratorial side of the film, can you?
Yeah, and shout out to the great Jacques Vallée, who's a dear family friend. One of the interesting things about the movie is if you compare the name to Star Wars, this is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is my father's classification system But it was a big struggle for Spielberg to get that name accepted. Imagine walking to a marketing department at Columbia Studios and saying, hey, fellows, I got a great name for the movie,
Right.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. First of all, it won't even fit on a poster. And then in the posters and the trailers, they had to explain what the title meant,
Right.
which is not really what they teach you in Branding 101.
Exactly. Huh? Right. Say what? And
they had to pony up money to my father to pay for the rights to the title to boot.
now, so back directly to my point, do you think, because Spielberg has never let his foot off the gas when it comes to this subject, he's done more alien ET contact films than any other director in the history of cinema. Is Steven in the know?
I don't know. At the very least, he, like many people, have this deep-seated interest in finding out if there have been visitations from either other planets, other dimensions, or someplace else.
Now let's talk about you personally. Have you made contact? Have you seen anything strange in the sky?
Oh, I'm relieved, because I thought you were going to ask me, am I from somewhere else? I'm from Evanston, Illinois.
I think you're a hybrid. I'm just going to go straight out and say that now.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you after the show, I can tell you a really funny hybrid story. Yes, it's part of a long answer, but I do feel I may have made some contact, but it's not what people would think.
Explain.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a preface I have to give for this. So my father, Jacques Vallée, and others, over time, came to feel that there is certainly a phenomenon. The sort of way my father is portrayed quite often is that he went from a skeptic to a believer. But my father was a scientist, and I don't think the word believer is really appropriate for a scientist. He didn't really believe in UFOs. Over time, he grew to accept the credibility of the accumulated weight of the evidence that, hey, there is something here. And it was annoying to him. He didn't want this to be true. He thought it was all, at first, post-war bunkum.
Right.
So over time, he came to feel there is a phenomenon. Now, that's a whole different matter than the provenance of where it, or whoever may come from. And that's more speculation. But over time, he started to feel that the sort of knee-jerk extraterrestrial hypothesis kind of fell flat in a lot of cases because, first of all, they have to come from enormous distances and tweak Einstein in the nose on the way here. We have super sensitive instruments to detect objects entering and leaving our atmosphere, and we don't have the corresponding number of those to go along with visual sightings of crafts. Plus, the crafts that people report seem to exhibit a lot of comfort with our Earth gravity and atmosphere. So, and then for me, I add on, I believe that we will have our singularity, which means artificial intelligence will become self-aware and recursively self-improving. And we see dystopian visions of that in Matrix and Terminator, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in that. I believe more, like my friend Ray Kurzweil, it will be more sort of blending and merging. Now, if a society on another planet has the ability to come here, it's almost certainly the case that they've had their own singularity, in which case there's no need and no interest for them to come here. So I have a lot of issues with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So that all leads me to answer your question. My father and Jacques and others started to feel that there could be something else even more exotic than extraterrestrial, like interdimensional as an origin to explain some of these. Because also some of the cases, they exhibit Cheshire cat-like phenomena. You see it here, then you see it there,
right,
violating all known laws of physics. So for me, an interdimensional hypothesis answers first how they could be here because they're here adjacent, let's say, already. It explains why they would be interested in us because they are maybe us or in the same kind of dimension space. It explains why they may be interested in nuclear plants, which a lot of crafts are apparently watching. And it shoots down a lot of the problems with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So, my dear Jimmy, that means So I was told by a friend of mine, Nova Spivak, about a book called Alien Information Theory. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have.
Okay. Now, you got to love it from the title alone. Alien friggin' information theory? Come on now.
Right.
So I said, okay, you sold me. So I read it, and it's about DMT and the commonality of reports of DMT, which is the most powerful psychedelic drug in the world, and about the commonality of reports of users who take it who feel transported to what feels like a hyper-real dimension that has entities there.
Okay, and we need to take our break, so let's do that. There's a perfect spot to do that. Our guest tonight, Paul Hynek, and we'll continue the DMT angle, I promise, right after this short break. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. Our guest tonight, Paul Hynek. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Paul Hynek. And this is what's interesting. Got a couple of events coming up this year, and Contact in the Desert. And Paul is going to be on my disclosure panel on Sunday night. And then coming up later on in the year is Paula Harris and Starworks USA. And Paul will also be with me at that conference. And that one is what we're talking about right now, UFOs and Artificial Intelligence. That's November 6th through the 8th in Laughlin, Nevada. And for tickets and info, you can go to Starworks USA and Contact in the Desert, of course, contactinthedesert.com. But it's pretty interesting, Paul. Finally, it's the Jimmy and Paul Tour 2020. I'm pretty excited about that. Right. Yeah, and what's it like for you? I want to get back to the DMT conversation, but for you to go out and attend these conferences, and you get to meet these attendees that come up and know about you personally. They know all about you, right? What's that like to hang out with the UFO community?
It's exhilarating, and the first time I did it, I think, was an Alien Con in support of Project Blue Book, and I was part of a panel with the producers and some of the actors. And after we were done, I'm walking off stage, and a bunch of people came running up to me with books to sign and things like that. And I thought, well, why would I sign this? But I realized that I was just sort of reflecting my dad, and that people who felt for years that my dad had given them permission, so to speak, or ground cover for them to talk about one of the most traumatic experiences that they felt they'd had. They felt that they could do that and sense some of that about my father with me there. So that was something I saw where I could see what my father must have gone through. And it became really fun. It's the one environment I can walk in and people see my name on a badge, and they understand who I am right away. So I got a kind of a goofy check name. Yeah,
no question about that. And the question about interdimensionality is certainly with your father and Jacques Vallée. And this coming up so many years ago, your dad, Jacques has always been a forward, thinking guy.
Oh, yeah.
But your dad was of the same mindset? He was a forward thinker when it came to this question?
Well, I think the way a lot of scientists think is they don't, there's a saying. I was a grand marshal for the March for Science in L.A. in 2017, like 50,000 people, and I and some others are in the sort of lead electric Hummers. So I had a bird's eye view of all 50,000 people, and one of the signs I saw there, which sometimes is attributed to Richard Feynman, said, "I'd rather have questions I can't answer than answers I can't question."
Right.
And I think that breaks down the world into two groups. And as a scientist, to put that into practice, let's say you come across what has the faint impression of perhaps a new phenomena, you shouldn't close it off too quickly, even if it doesn't comport with what you think is at work, or it's not consistent with the grant you're going after. It may be annoying and perhaps even, detrimental to your career, but you need to keep your mind open. And at the same time, once you've determined, hey, there may be a phenomena here, don't rush to judgment by grabbing the best available answer and shoving that in, because the answer may be either different types of solutions or something more complex than you thought. So I think a scientist doesn't rush to one answer, but will eliminate other things first. And so the theory of extraterrestrial, it may account for some things. I mean, the universe is teeming with life. It may account for some cases. I don't know, but it certainly doesn't seem to account for all of them. So that's what led Jacques and my father and many others to say this phenomena seems to have aspects that go above and beyond the nuts and bolts visitation from other planets.
It would only make sense, and through my own experiences that I've had with groups of people, where things appear to just appear, and things seem to disappear as quick as they appeared. And you start to question your own, you're like, wait a minute here. I'm trying to be rational. I'm trying to be objective, but that doesn't make any sense. And the only thing that would make sense is to suggest a parallel world, interdimensional, multiverse aspect to this, which also satisfies the physics side of it too.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Or, there's other theories too, like my friend Michael Masters thinks that they may be us from the future.
That's right.
Now that gets in the thorny issue of time travel. So, the idea that there's perhaps another dimension or other dimensions, and when I came across DMT, I thought that was fascinating. And what happened was I was told about it by my friend Nova Spivak, and I had heard about DMT but hadn't really considered it, because he asked me what my father thought was the answer, and I told him. He said, you should read that book. 2 hours later, I met with a new friend, and he started talking about DMT. I figured, okay, the universe is talking to me. So in addition to my committed status as a Fadernaut, I thought I should become a psychonaut and try it myself.
Okay, hold on a minute now. Now, this is where we pump the brakes. I know that you're cool, but mentioning DMT research coming from you is a little bit confusing. So it's one thing to comment on the DMT information that's out there, but it's another thing to go full committed. So let's continue this. Right.
Well, hopefully I don't get full committed in another sense. But I decided, look, if this is a strand of my father's and Jacques and Paula Harris's and others' research theories.
Right.
So now here's a chance, because, I also read The Spirit Molecule by Rick Strassman and a lot of stuff online. And, DMT is a naturally occurring substance secreted by the pineal gland, and it's in thousands of plants. It's coursing through the natural world. And people think that, the idea is it could be a portal to another dimension. Now, since it's an extremely powerful psychedelic, it could just be this chemical is tripping with your mind. You can't rule that out. But I thought, in the interest of science, Jimmy, purely in the interest of science, I would pick up the mantle and do my own exploration and see what's there.
And what did you find out?
So I read up on experiences, and I knew what to do. And my first experience, this stuff shoots you out of a cannon. And if I had done psychedelic drugs in the past, this was 1,000 times stronger than all of them put together if I had done any in the past. And what I experienced was similar to what other people have reported, which is the kind of commonality my father found interesting in UFO reports, that I was shot through this sort of unbelievably visually rich, colorful wormhole and wound up somewhere. And I didn't really think, hey, this is another dimension. It just felt somewhere so real. And I felt, whether I saw or not, I don't know, but I perceived sort of the fabric of the universe being created. And Joe Rogan has called it complex patterns made of love and understanding.
Right.
And that sums it up pretty well to me. And there was a mostly female presence surging all around me. And once I got my sea legs, so to speak, I actually asked, hey, are you what we perceive to be aliens and UFOs?
No.
And if sort of a cosmic intelligence can sigh, it sighed. And then the answer I got back, Jimmy, was, well, we can't explain in a way that you would understand. And it wasn't condescending. It wasn't snarky. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I understand no. So it sounds like there's some amount of yes in your answer. So to me, that was a tantalizing first potential contact, and I plan to go back and expand the conversation.
I'm fascinated right now.
Yeah,
okay. Let's back up. I have 5,000 questions. I can only ask one. Did you visually make an assessment of this female presence?
You know, it's hard to say because it's so overwhelming. I don't know if I heard things, saw things, or things appeared in my mind.
Right.
It's all kind of humbly-jumbly. But I did feel, and just because I felt that it's real, it really doesn't matter. It's like my father would discount single witness cases because there's just no corroborating evidence. Also, you could say, well, hey, Paul, you read a whole bunch of accounts that were like this.
Right.
You tainted yourself and you planted a seed.
Right.
Sure, that could be the case too.
Sure.
All I know is I felt that it was super real, and I certainly came back with the impression my experience was far more interesting enough to trip the wire for me to want to do it again, and to see if I can't document it and apply some kind of scientific rubric to it to replicate it and expand upon it. And, you know, Rick Strassman, who wrote Spirit Molecule, and Andrew Gallimore, who I'll meet because we're both going to be speaking at Contact in the Desert, as you know.
Right.
And I want to talk with him and say, look, I'm coming at this from the UFO point of view. You're coming at it from DMT. Let's try to work together and see if we can create something here.
Shouldn't the scientific community, especially when you're talking about theoretical physics and quantum physics and entanglement, which is suggesting strongly by the numbers, by the equations, parallel worlds, the multiverse, extra dimensions, string theory, all of these things that physicists want us to grasp hold of are certainly all of the things that our community has been talking about for thousands of years. And they are merging. Shouldn't DMT be scientifically investigated as a way to access the parallel worlds that they've been trying to convince us of? Right? Isn't that where we are at?
Absolutely. But there's a sort of resurgence in legitimacy and credibility of psychedelics in general. In the 50s they weren't illegal. They became illegal, Schedule I and Schedule II, etc. But now there's been a very widespread resurgence in psilocybin, MDMA, and other psychedelics as powerful therapeutic tools. But from perhaps my experience and what I've gleaned from others, DMT seems to be unique in this possibility of a window to some other entities, let's say.
Or another dimension, or,
Sure.
something that's...
Or just a trippier recess of your own mind, who knows?
Yeah, that could be too. That could be too. Now I'm not going to let this get away. Did you get an opportunity to go back and ask the second question? So
I've done it more, and my experiences were different the subsequent times, and they were sort of more cathartically, emotionally internal. And my very good friend, who was my facilitator, said that the plant medicine wanted to give me a different experience and that it was giving me what it felt I needed as opposed to what I wanted. So, it's just, for me to hear about one of the more exotic theories that my father and others had, and to have a potential way to investigate that presented in a really well-researched and scientific manner is too good to pass up. And it's just the fact that it happens to be super fun is just icing on the cake, Jimmy.
The descriptions of it, which I have read. Oh, by the way, disclaimer here: I have not researched DMT personally. I have certainly talked to a lot of people about it, and I've done the same research that you have done into other people's experiences. There is a bona fide similarity that is identical with everybody's experience, and that I find tremendously compelling. And everybody suggests one thing over and over again: it's another world. It is an access. It is certainly that you are accessing another dimension. You are not here. And was that your experience?
Yeah, and again, people can say, well, if you read about this beforehand, you have something for your mind to latch onto because it's such a powerful experience, and it provides this comforting thing to you, this sort of known paradigm. But the first time I did it, I had my friend whose name rhymes with Keg Gratano with us, and he didn't know. He hadn't read anything about it. He had no prior conceptions of what you might expect. He's a pretty brave guy. Mm-hmm. And after we both did it, my friend, the facilitator, and I looked at him first and said, what did you experience? And his report was extremely similar also, having not heard about anybody else's cases, which I found very compelling.
Yeah, exactly. And now, how much of the experience is what I have read? One, it's 15 minutes. You come out of it with your feet on the ground. You are back to, if normal is the right word, very, very quickly. There's that part of it, but you are also able to recall and remember all of it. So, same thing for you?
For the first part, yes. They call it the businessman's high because it is like 15 minutes. And I told my friends that after it, I'd take us out to dinner. But after 15 minutes, you're back and you're fully present, but you're just not in the mood to go to, say, Applebee's because your world has been upturned.
Right.
And you still, I feel like I only remember 1 or 2% of the overall experience. And part of that is because there's so much coming at you that our five senses are just not nearly enough to input it. And maybe we're accessing something else. It's like you have a 300 baud modem, and they're coming at you full, high-speed fiber optic. It's just too much information coming at you. So even if you do remember what you think is all of it, you can't intake anywhere near all of it at the same time. That was my feeling.
Full color, panchromatic.
Oh yeah, the most vibrant colors. It almost gets to be like synesthesia, where colors take on different aspects. It's just unlike anything I'd seen before.
Now, there's another aspect to psychedelics, which it's just a trip. You're just high.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. It's fun. You're doing this recreationally. You know that you may have insights to your own mind and emotions and your own spirituality, but that's all by choice. And it's how you want to experience it. With DMT, I don't. Same thing with ayahuasca, I'm sure, but with DMT, that is not necessarily the case. You are not in control of any of this, are you?
No, and with other psychedelics, you're still in the room. Right. You understand you're in a room. There may be a vortex opening up in the wall behind you, but you can interact with people in the room. You may not be a sparkling conversationalist because you're watching the trails from your hand, but you're still present in the room. with DMT, bam, you're out of there. You are not present in the room, nor are you present in what you think is your world. So yeah, it's qualitatively different than anything else I'm aware of.
Is there a way, Paul, before we hit the break, is there a way to take this into a lab setting and scientifically start to try to understand what is going on?
Yeah, so Rick Strassman and Andrew Gallimore are working on a formulation where you can have an IV drip and stay in there for a much longer period of time, because part of the issue is kind of like lucid dreams. They're very fleeting. You get in there and you have low experience and you're gone. So their idea is to allow people to inhabit or to feel like they're in that realm for a much longer period of time and really set about the business of trying to figure out, hey, is there a way to sort of make contact and prove the existence of it?
And what about, before we hit the break, I had asked you earlier if you had seen anything strange in the sky. Have you had, an experience where you've gone out and looked up and maybe expected or not, but you saw something?
No, I've not seen anything nor had any contact with what I would consider a UFO.
And what about your father? There's the public side, but then there's the private side. Did he ever confide with you?
Well, there were maybe 1.5 sightings that he felt he had, and he actually took a picture of this in one of his books of a craft from an airplane. But like I said before, single witness cases without any corroboration, they're interesting, but they're not as sort of good in a sort of abstract petri dish as a multiple witness case with radar corroboration and, things like that. And also my father was somewhat reticent to talk about cases that he may have seen because he was much more comfortable inhabiting that area of being an impartial scientist with a flashlight, letting the chips fall where they may, as opposed to an experiencer in his own right, because that was just not really comfortable for a scientist. There were 3 groups. I know we have to stop, but there were 3 groups that he felt he had to be aware of. One was the military and government community, one was mainstream scientists, and one was, let's call them believers in the UFO phenomena. And I think he felt that he had to keep each of those groups mildly unhappy to be doing a balanced job as a scientist.
The famous video of your father at the end of Project Blue Book, those statements by him, you can hear his disappointment. And I feel like he was holding back. He wasn't. I don't think he was saying what he really wanted to say. But it was also 1969. It was a different environment. Yeah. He may have said something different in 2020 if it would have gone down the same way. But how disappointed was he really in 1969? Well,
the Condon Committee, we can get into the details and the machinations, but it's sort of the cover that the Air Force used to back out of at least at the time of the UFO research business for the public relations exercise that Project Blue Book had become. The jury was in long before that, even as early as 1953 in the Robertson panel.
Right.
So my father knew all along, pretty much from the beginning, that Project Grudge, Sign, and then Blue Book were not serious scientific efforts to recover and reverse engineer propulsion systems, but were PR exercises to tamp down public hysteria. So my father, debated whether or not to stay involved with the program. James McDonald and others criticized him for staying involved, but he thought, look, yes, this is not science that's going on here, but if I'm not here, I don't have access to the data, and even more importantly, he had influence, not control, but influence over what data was collected and how it was assigned and reported. So he had the ability to do that, and then he had access to that data afterwards. And that's how he came up with the classification system, Close Encounters of the First, Second, and Third Kind, because he had the crucial insight that he wasn't studying UFOs. He was studying UFO reports. And so he applied a rubric to reports so that scientists around the world could start to compare apples to apples. So he knew that it wasn't an honest scientific exercise. and he knew the Air Force's role, that still didn't mean it wasn't frustrating to him many times.
Let's take our break right here. Fascinating conversation. And when we come back after the break, we'll jump straight into the new series, of course, Project Blue Book on History Channel. Our guest tonight is Paul Hynek. And I got to tell you, Paul, that DMT conversation is all over Twitter now. We will be right back after this.
Yeah, when you go DMT in the first segment, it goes crazy.
Yeah, there you go. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Paul Hynek. I want to remind everybody, Wednesday night we're going to have Steve Mayer on live from the UK. And June 26th and 27th of 2020, we're taking Fade to Black over to the United Kingdom and to Europe to the Awakening Conference in Manchester. You can go to awakeningufo.com for tickets and information. It's going to be great to finally make it over to the UK. And our guest tonight, Paul Hynek. And Paul, we want to shift gears a little bit. Twitter is saying no, stay on DMT. But the hit series, Project Blue Book, is the success has been pretty extraordinary. And let's actually start where everybody is expecting this conversation to start, which is the depiction of your family and your father and your mother. There seems to be an extraordinary amount of artistic license going on here. Are you okay? I know you're a consulting producer and you're an advisor on the series, but are you okay with that?
Yeah, so one of the questions I get is, was your mother cavorting with a lesbian Russian spy?
Of course. And,
my stock answer to that is, you should see the stuff they left out. So,
right.
The thing about the show, and yes, my brother Joel and I are both consultants on the show, and we have a very good relationship and friendships with the cast, the creator, the showrunner, the producers, and the networking folks. So, and here's what I'll say. It's a very interesting premise to take real people and real reports, not necessarily real events, but real reports of UFO events, and then layer on the first layer being sort of visualizations of what people report, and then, yes, adding fictional elements. And so, we all talk about that quite a lot. Will that work? How do you do that? And so one of the things that history has done, is show the beginning of the episode to learn more about this, especially in the first season, to learn more about the real reports, click here. And they've had interviews with Jacques Vallée and Richard Dolan and Joel and I and others talking about some of the things that were really reported. So the main thing that we determined was the show is not going to be altogether accurate because it's a dramatization. But what's important, especially for Joel and I representing our family, is that the show portray our mother and father in an authentic way, but not necessarily accurate. So we had quite a lot of talks and met with Aidan Gillen, my TV dad, and Laura Manel, my TV mom, for them to get what they needed to understand about what really made our parents tick, so that they could take that sort of emotional core and then have their characters with their own interpretation added onto it because they're talented artists, and then put those characters in stretched circumstances, but still have the characters act in ways that are still consistent with that authentic core. And I think the show does that successfully. So for me, the show is about a scientist and his wife, and you can see Mimi's emergence in season 2, thrown into this super weird environment and trying to understand it and apply science to it and come around to think there is a phenomena there, which is what my father's arc, so to speak. So the show does that in a very respectful way, and everything else is really fine-tuning.
And then there's the twist on this is for the audience out there that is watching the show, maybe not 100% immersed into the UFO culture or research, and is being introduced to it for the first time as fact, right? And they are now thinking that your dad was in an underground research laboratory in New Mexico that's run by Werner von Braun, and your dad is looking at ETs and giant tanks, being grown, and they walk away from the show thinking that this actually happened. Is there a concern with that maybe it may be misleading some people?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that the show portrays itself as an accurate representation of everything. I think it's kind of commonly understood that it's fictionalized. Now, if some people do believe everything in there, okay, more power to them. But it's not. If you do, it's not hard to fact check and find out that's not true. In fact, you can go to the History, Channel website and find out, the real takes on the subject. So I'm not that worried about it. I think most people find that it's an interesting portrayal. Now, I've had people say, hey, look, episode 1 in season 1, the Gorman dogfight is the Fuller dogfight, and it banked left instead of right. They'll pick apart some of the aspects of the cases. But again, it's, largely true. And there were, in the first 2 episodes of season 2, there was a twofer about Roswell. There were a lot of historically accurate details from reports in there that were laid into the narrative, because both the creator of the show, David O'Leary, and the showrunner, Sean Jablonski, are huge UFO buffs. And the show started off on a really good footing because Arturo Interian, the network executive at History for the first season, is also a huge UFO buff. And they have a very respectful outlook towards UFOs, and they wanted to portray it in a serious way. But the dictates of cable television are that you need these sort of dramatized elements to get people to watch it. So I view it as a piece that has like a logical or an accurate foundation and a fictional overcoating. So you mentioned about Close Encounters, how some people think it's true. Well, I think, you can look at these in the same light. And by having some fictional elements, it does a really great service, because you can write books, factual books and documentaries about UFOs, which are quite good, but they don't always expand the tent. But if you have a fictional piece of work that has some true aspects to it, you can get more people involved. Like, you may have one person in the family who likes UFOs, and other people don't care, and they see Project Blue Book or Close Encounters, and they say, wow, that's really interesting. I'd like to learn more. And now the family can have an enlarging conversation about it. I think that happens in society at large. It's usually works that go into the fictional world as well that really move the needle for acceptance in the public circles and public discourse.
And you're right about that, because episode 1 last year, I did the same thing that everybody else did the next day, which was we picked it apart. I mean, just completely, and then went into the next one, and I did the same thing. And at that point, I had to just stop, because I realized what was going on. And there are those in the UFO community, me being one, where we like to flaunt our knowledge, right? We just do. And there are a lot of people. Right. There's a lot of people out there that know an awful lot about everything. And I ended up going very public on this and stating that, look, I enjoy the show. I do. I don't look at the show as historical record. It's just entertainment. And if it is going to expand the UFO question out there further, then we win. Wasting time about picking the facts apart about each episode is worthless. But, and there's always a but. There's a but, Paul. And here's the but. That's now. That's today. But there will be a few years from now, a few years into the future, where the show will get washed into fact, where I am going to have to answer a question where somebody's going to come up and say, yeah, but, and they're going to say, because it has now, it's like the game telephone, right? And now these fictionalized parts of the show are going to be brought into the culture as fact, and we are going to have to go back and say, well, you know what? No, actually, they made it up. You know what I mean? And I think that's the danger zone.
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, if elements of the show enter the permanent, firmament of the public zeitgeist, hey, that's a problem worth having. That's fine. I think the show does a great service to presenting UFOs in a respectful and open-minded way. And, not all the shows end with, oh my gosh, that's a, Werner von Braun transporting ship. Some of them are explained away. And they use explanations that my father came up with at sometimes. So I think, the main thing is the show is a very good, open-minded look at a super enigmatic phenomena and a man and a woman who, took it on and tried to advance science in it as far as they could.
Now, there is one problem with the show that I have, and it's a big one. Your dad's pipe. What's going on with that?
Yes. So that is what I get from our dear friend, our mutual dear friend, Paula Harris. Right?
Absolutely.
She can't stand to watch my dad without a pipe.
Right.
Now they all know about that. I did a lot of research, and I asked Sean Jablonski, the showrunner, about that. And he said, well, Paul, the problem is in TV, a pipe sort of evokes this feeling of stagnation, and we need sort of a more frenetic, active feel to the show. There's also continuity issues with smoke and things like that. And for me, I can't count the number of times or hours I saw my dad with a pipe, but it doesn't really subtract. And there is, I think in episode 10, they give him a pipe to, calm down the fan base. But it doesn't really subtract from the essential core of my father. And I'll tell you one thing that happened. I think Aidan Gillen is a fantastic actor and a great guy.
No doubt.
And for the record, it's not super creepy at all to have the supervillain from Game of Thrones play your TV dad. Not at all, Jimmy. So, he's just a wonderful guy. And the first time of the 3 times I've been on the set, it was in season 1, and Aidan was doing his own stunt driving, being chased by a mysterious sedan. And between takes, he would come over and talk with me. And one time when he's walking back to the car wearing that sort of the fedora and the trench coat, I actually felt my father. It was really a riveting moment for me.
I wanted to ask you about that directly, knowing that, both Laura and Aidan, playing your parents. How accurate is that? Did Aidan go back and study your dad, or has he made your dad his own character?
Yeah, they both, to their credit, they both studied him quite a lot. And I had a lot of conversations with them. My brother Joel and I had a lot of emails. Laura talked with my sister Roxanne as well. And they really apply themselves, as they've done before, to sort of understanding that core of a true character upon which they can layer their own artistic interpretation. And I think they did fantastic jobs. One of the interesting moments for me in season 1 was episode 10, where Laura is walking down the street wearing a brown coat and sort of a turquoise brooch. And I remember looking at that saying, wow, that looks super familiar. I completely forgot I had given it to Laura a year and a half before production. It was my mom's real brooch.
Okay. Now, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the same with Aidan. I gave him a tie that he's worn in public appearances, and I imagine it will make its way into the show as well. And, it's interesting because seeing that brooch sort of broke down the wall between the sort of surreal world of my TV family and my real life. Because sometimes I'll watch the show and I'll get, lost in the drama, and then I'll hear them say Mimi and Al, and I realize, oh, Jimmy, that's my family again. Holy cow.
Now, there's the other part about this, and I think we're all wondering about, is Aiden being portrayed as a James Bond, excuse me, a James Bond type character nearly in every episode. Like, would your dad be predisposed to jump on a fighter aircraft and chase UFOs and crash it? I mean, was your dad that outgoing? Because he seems a little bit more conservative.
Absolutely, Jimmy. I don't know anybody who's traveled as much as my father. And one thing that's really interesting, I'm sure you know about, and you may have met Calvin Parker from the 1973 Pascagoula case.
Absolutely.
So Calvin and I have become good friends, and we did an interview at a conference last year. And he told me something I'd never heard, and I've known Calvin for 40 years, that he and Charlie Hickson got out of the police station about 11 p.m. that Sunday night, and they were back at the shipyards the next morning for work, early in the morning, which I thought was impressive in its own right.
Right.
And he told me my father was waiting in the HR office at 6:47 the next morning.
No,
he didn't figure out how my dad got there that quickly.
Wait a minute. He didn't tell me about this. Okay, this is an interesting twist. Did your father tell you about this?
No. There's a lot of things I learned about. My father and my mother were from a generation where they didn't often start conversations about themselves, no matter what it was about. So I asked a lot of questions. We'd have to pry things out of them or have other people tell me about them. So I didn't know that. And I still don't know how it happened. I mean, he must have, we lived in Chicago. This is on the Gulf Coast. He must have been somewhere around there on other business already. But still, how does the word get to him between 11 p.m. on a Sunday and that morning? I don't know how that happened.
Well, it's also it pops up often in the show, and I wanted to ask you about this specifically, where you guys are, the family is there, your mom is there, the phone call comes in, your dad just gets home from an investigation. He walks in, the phone rings, okay, honey,
and he's gone again.
Yeah. Is that the way it went down?
Yeah, my father was on the road quite a lot. Besides, before UFOs, he put observatories all around the world as part of Operation Moonwatch to track artificial satellites, as they called them in the day.
Right.
So he set up citizen teams around the world, and they were the first ones to spot and track Sputnik. So he had a track record of already traveling to, we would go on eclipse cruises. My family, my younger brother Ross and my mom and I, in 1973, went on an eclipse cruise to Africa for 2 weeks, and our family and Neil Armstrong's family sat together for the full 2 weeks. And at that time, he's the most famous guy in the world. I am an astronomer's kid. I was in heaven.
Right. And I wanted to, speaking specifically about these cases, when it is portrayed in the series, I just have to ask this question. The Men in Black aspect of it, which comes and goes a lot in the film, historically the timing is a bit off, and we can ignore that. But they certainly made it a part of the series. Did your dad ever discuss the Men in Black or interference or otherwise?
Yeah, he talked about Men in Black, and he talked about sort of efforts overall to just sort of, one of the things he also mentioned is, like that old saw about the devil, that the devil wants to make himself look as ridiculous as possible so people don't believe in him. Right. And I think he felt that's what, and it's now publicly documented that the government did engage in public disinformation credits in efforts to make the field of ufology look ridiculous, as not to warrant serious attention or concern. And that's actually part of the Air Force's job, right? I mean, their job is to project offensive power through the air to prevent the projection of power from foes onto us, but also to create the perception amongst the populace that they are protecting us. Now, if they come out and say, hey, we have no idea what's going on, then we're going to feel insecure, and the Air Force would never do that. which makes the recent Navy disclosures all the more compelling because they've gone public and said, oh, we've seen hundreds of UFOs, we have no idea what's happening, and we could use a little help reporting them.
And also repeated in the, I don't know how fictional this is, but your father in the series, Aiden, is having conversations with the Men in Black. It's not that he was being observed from down the street, but there's evidence exchanging hands. Conversation is happening. Did your father ever talk about that?
Yeah, he did. To him, it wasn't the most interesting aspect. Because remember, he's an astronomer, so his natural default is the stars. So what was happening for the Air Force and all that, yeah, that impacted him, but he was much more interested in what may have happened and getting to the witnesses themselves than being obscured or hampered by these other government agencies. And, he thought it was interesting because the most likely explanation for them was some other American agency. Now, you could say they're Russians, or you could say they're aliens themselves.
Sure.
But, the Occam's razor explanation, they're just another component of the U.S. government, because we have a tendency to think of the government as acting as one monolithic, rational organization all in lockstep. But I think it's, once you learn about government, you realize that there are fiefdoms and territorial wars and different agencies fighting actively at cross purposes against each other. So you could have Project Blue Book ostensibly going out to find the truth, but really trying to tamp down hysteria. As of 1953, you had the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron being sort of like the crash recovery team that has to get anywhere in the continental U.S. within 6 hours, and they all speak Russian, and they're paratroopers, and they're the ones that would go out and try to reverse engineer a propulsion system, for example. Now, people think that the Men in Black may have been part of the Air Intelligence Service Squadron because they're like the rapid response team, and they want to not only collect whatever materials there are, but contain the dissemination of the spread of the information.
And I think I'm understanding that your father did he call them Men in Black? I mean, how did he identify them, or did he just say agents? Because it sounds to me that he didn't necessarily know if they were friend or foe, if they were Russian, if they were ETs, right, if they were from the Air Force.
Yeah, he called them Men in Black directly, and
he did.
Viewed them as and he viewed them as hampering. They weren't a helpful presence for him by no means.
He identified them as Men in Black.
Yeah, and you can look in the book, The Hynek UFO Report, and I think also Edge of Reality that he co-wrote with Jacques Vallée, and they use that exact term, yes.
Right. But that was later. I'm thinking, was he using the term Men in Black in the 60s around you?
Yeah, that I don't know.
Right.
But I know in certainly in retrospect, he certainly was.
Wow, that is just crazy. What a great childhood. I thought, this is the thing. Paul, my parents, my childhood, very open, the whole UFO, Eric Von Daniken, Edgar Casey, Ouija board world that I grew up in suggested to me that the world wasn't as it seems. And when I speak about this, I find that everybody else around me has the same story, right? We all do. We had parents that allowed us freedom of thought. You certainly had that in spades, right? Where you had freedom of thought. Were you shown very early on that the world just wasn't as it seems, and that you may be lied to about this? And so let's go down the other fork in the road. Is that the way it was for you?
Yeah, I wasn't brought up in a religious household. I was brought up in a scientific academic household, and it wasn't, how much money you made or what kind of clothes you had or what kind of car you had. It was the ideas you brought to the table, literally and figuratively, and the way you could discuss them that was most interesting to my parents. And we had other professors, other astronomers, not only people that were interested in UFOs, over all the time to talk about all kinds of interesting phenomena. And my dad and mom both had voracious intellectual appetites and wanted to learn about fields that they didn't know, but also wanted to talk in detail with people in their own fields and learn more and share experiences. So it was a fantastically intellectually stimulating environment. Absolutely.
Now, and you know what's really interesting? We got to take a break right here. But what if your father was had the knowledge that we have today of exoplanets and the amount of stars in the Milky Way and the amount of planets that are here and fast radio bursts and these contacts, that are happening today? What a different place we would be, and certainly with him too, right?
Yeah, he would love, iPhones and computers. He was a huge technology nerd, always ahead of his time, and he would just be fascinated by, how much science has advanced, but also with the aspects of disclosure that we're seeing, like the recent Navy stuff that I mentioned. He would be utterly fascinated that the Navy is publicly saying, we've seen UFOs and we need help. I find that as or more compelling than any individual case is the behavior of individuals, like when the Air Force reported, hey, we found a flying saucer at Roswell. And then the next day, of course, they famously walk it back. But that day they reported it. And you have to think that the base commander could tell the difference between balsa wood, tinfoil, and rubber from a weather balloon and some shape-changing alien alloy that nobody had ever seen before. So it's that kind of thing that's super compelling to me. Yeah,
you would think that, at the most top secret location on planet Earth, right, which was Roswell, New Mexico. Let's take our break right here, Paul. Our guest tonight, Paul Hynek. What a great conversation. And, Paul, I'm going to warm you up for this. After the break, here's the question. Was there a real General Harding, and was he a jerk, according to J. Allen Hynek? We'll get the answer to that question after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Fade to Black. If you've ever missed a live show, this is a live radio broadcast, but if you've ever missed a live show, just subscribe to our podcast. It's just $2 per month. Go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on that podcast banner. We have almost 1,200 past episodes right there in the archives for you for just $2 per month. Our guest tonight, Paul Hynek. And Paul, the question right before the break, and Neil McDonough plays a pretty good jerk. But I think that Neil, who plays General James Harding in the series, is also compassionate about the subject, too. He's torn between two worlds. Mm-hmm. Was there a guy like that in your father's life?
Well, yeah. So Neil McDonough plays General Harding, who's actually based on General Nathan Twining, and the fantastic Michael Harney plays General Valentine, who was based on General Vandenberg. But there were clearance issues. So just between us girls, Jimmy, that's who they're supposed to be. And my father met a lot of generals who had all sorts of different attitudes about UFOs. So, and what's interesting is that they play two gentlemen who may decide to kill my TV dad. And I talked with Michael Harney quite a bit about this and how, he portrays what someone might say as a bad guy, the bad guy at least being in opposition to the protagonist in the show. And, one of the things we talked about was that in his position, you have this perhaps rogue professor going off the reservation who could sort of tear at the fabric of national security. And in this kind of ever-present wartime footing in the Cold War, if you're a general who feels that if these secrets get out, it's going to cause pandemonium and chaos at large, then maybe you do what you need to do and you sleep just fine with your kids that night. So, they approached it from the point of view that we have to keep a lid on this, because if it gets out, who knows what's going to happen? So they do what they do.
And what about Captain Quinn? Michael Malarkey. Was there somebody that was at your house hanging out from the Air Force that was your dad's partner, having these private conversations? And were you ever listening in?
Yes, and I want to say, Michael Malarkey is also a fantastic actor. And fun fact about old Michael, he grew up 10 minutes from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in real life.
That's pretty nuts. And
Captain Quinn, his name, he's an amalgamation of various Air Force directors of Project Blue Book, leaning most heavily on Edward Ruppelt.
Yep.
But there were at least 5 different ones. And so, yes, my father had relationships with them. They would come to the house and met the family. And, it was very interesting. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Friend is the one that I met. And Arturo Interian and David O'Leary and I were there on his 99th birthday party. He's the last surviving Air Force director of Project Blue Book. He was also an American hero. He worked on the space shuttle, and I think he had over 150 combat missions in World War II and Vietnam. Just an amazing guy. And I was there on his 99th birthday party, and I told him a joke about George Burns, because George Burns was famous for wanting to live to be 100. And someone once asked him, and I told this to Lieutenant Colonel Friend on his 99th birthday, the joke was a woman asked him, "But Mr. Burns, who really wants to live to be 100? And George Burns, shakes his cigar and says, someone who's 99.
There was, I want to move forward and talk about today. I'm looking at the clock, and I knew we'd run out of time.
Yeah.
And we're getting we're getting dangerously close to that. I want to go back really quick and address the Area 51 episode for a couple of reasons. One, historically and factually, there are some things here that really clash. But they also suggest the secrecy and what may be going on out at Area 51. Certainly the door on the side of the mountain and your father witnessing that. But there's another part to this that I think is significant, at least to me, which is when they walked into the hangar and they see all of these different types of aircraft, and your father and Quinn at that point say, okay, this answers that case, that craft over there answers that case, and that answers this case, suggesting that it is all terrestrial, that this is, secret Air Force experimental aircraft that are answering your father's own questions about the UFO question. Do you think that is pushing the envelope a little bit, and that is not where your father was coming from? I don't think your dad ever visited Area 51, but this is suggesting a terrestrial answer to a bunch of your dad's cases.
Yeah, well, apart from the Easter dinners that I mentioned we used to have there every year, that's sort of tying everything up in a dramatic bow.
Right.
Because a show like this, the show doesn't want to sort of go too far into woo-woo land. It wants to present a really serious subject with some of the more exotic aspects, but the fact that many of the cases do have terrestrial origins.
The going back about the Flatwoods Monster, right? Or each one of the, it seems that not all of the episodes, but each one of them is suggesting a reasonable explanation to these. Was this your father's point of view, like specifically the Flatwoods Monster, where even I backed up and went, okay, now they're really twisting this a bit too much?
Well, the idea of the show, especially the first season, which had the construct of being based on a real report, was to present a lot of the aspects that were known about the case and then to run with it a bit. So they don't always hew to exactly what my father thought.
Right. In that, for me, and I don't want to, pound this into the ground, but one of the things that your dad had, his problem with Blue Book, is that he was forced into giving explanations for these cases to calm, public fear.
Right.
And in some aspects, that's exactly what the series is doing too. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things about Project Blue Book in reality was, as the show portrays, it was an answer factory. It was not an investigation. So even though they had this tremendous impetus and tremendous pressure to explain everything away, of the 12,000 odd cases that they took on officially, they still could not assign explanations to over 5% of them, which is a very telling statistic.
It's a big statistic. Okay, one last thing, and then I want to talk about today.
Sure.
Swamp gas.
Oh, my gosh.
Swamp gas. And did your
Heard
father...
it the first time.
Yeah, right. Did your father have any idea of the decades of conversation that swamp gas would create?
I don't think so. And it was taken out of context. He didn't mean to say. So for those who don't know, swamp gas was an explanation that was given in part for sightings around, I think, Hillsdale, Michigan in 1966 by a lot of women in a sorority and others on campus. And my father went there to investigate, and the Air Force was applying tremendous pressure. And he said some of the aspects of this could be explained by a phenomenon known as swamp gas. Well, the press isn't always known for, keeping all the nuances of an explanation from an erudite college professor. And so they ran with swamp gas.
Right.
And the person that seemed to anger the most was a then congressman named Gerald Ford, who got so incensed that he wrote and, basically spurred the establishment of the Condon Committee, which went on to shut down Project Blue Book.
And the term, okay, I understand what swamp gas means today to everybody, but up to that point in 1966, was it even a scientific term? It seemed that everybody had heard swamp gas for the first time, where your father and the way that it was portrayed was that everybody knows about swamp gas.
Well, he had a way with coining phrases like close encounters and high strangeness, so perhaps swamp gas was something he coined and sort of caught on. I don't know.
Did he regret it?
Yeah, it was not sort of the high point of his UFO investigation career, let's say that.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Today, here we are, you and I, you just brought it up, right? That who would have imagined that you would be on a radio show like this in 2020 discussing UFOs and your father? But here
I'll tell you who would not have imagined that. My father would not have imagined that. I'll tell you that.
That's right. And would he be happy right now with the progress that appears to be happening, where we are moving this a bit forward?
Yeah, I think he would be especially. My father viewed himself as a scientist, but also a popularizer of science. He wrote maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of articles for newspapers and books about astronomy in general, and really wanted people to understand not the importance, but the majesty and the romance of science and technology. So, UFOs was something he thought was important for people to give a fair shake. And I think I've seen a change in the culture that now that I think more people feel comfortable talking openly about their views about UFOs. Going back decades, there's a large amount of the population, often a majority, that believe in UFOs, but now many more people feel comfortable about that. My father would feel strongly, I believe, that is a really positive sign. Now, in terms of from the government aspect and disclosure, I was talking to my good friend Jen Harzan today, the executive director of MUFON, the largest UFO research group. And, he has an interesting way to look at it, where he feels that disclosure is more a progress or a process and has already happened, especially starting with the New York Times revelation of the Navy saying that, hey, we see all these encounters and, the Nimitz and all these fantastic sightings have all this evidence. So for me, that's a very interesting component that my father would have really latched onto, this notion that there maybe has already been a disclosure, And then, as Jan says, we're waiting for confirmation from the government of what has already been disclosed. And then, to me, the third layer, to say the third kind encounter here, would be acceptance by the public. Because we live in a very fractured world now with fake news. So even if you had that quintessential archetypal landing of a flying saucer on the lawn of the White House, let's say you have identical twins, Bianca and Amy, and they both see this, one of them may believe it and one of them may not, because we're so fractured in society that I think one of the most, challenging aspects of a government that may have these secrets to disclose, which they're already starting to dribble out, let's say, in some preordained editorial schedule, is will people actually believe anything that we say, which is a new phenomenon that didn't exist 30, 40 years ago.
Are you okay with that, though? There's always two ways to look at things. And whenever I suggest that a disclosure has already happened and I don't need disclosure, it's because definitions mean different things to different people. And the other side of the room, Paul, as you know, disclosure to them is our current sitting president doing a live television presentation. That's disclosure. And so we're stuck in between.
Well, and I do agree with Jan that disclosure is a process, and others, Richard Dolan and Steve Bassett feel that it's more of this ongoing process to sort of, before maybe that smoking gun, to prime the narrative and sort of control the contours of the discussion. But to me, it's just an interesting phenomenon that my dad, I think, would have been interested in. Hey, I do play the tape of, the saucer landing on the White House lawn or this or that. And still a significant portion of the population may just refuse to believe it, either because it doesn't comport with their religious beliefs or they're just too skeptical about anything that they're presented at all. Now with, like deep fake videos, my father used to say 1,000 pictures are worth a word. Well, now it maybe be 1,000,000 pictures and videos are worth a word.
There's a third group that you didn't mention. I would love your comment on. And the third group wouldn't even care. Right, I'm serious too.
Yeah, right.
They're so acclimated, as so been pummeled with this that okay, yeah, I know. All right, so they're real. What's the big deal? I mean, we knew this all along.
Yeah, right, and that's the most interesting belief. Okay, I believe that there are aliens. I believe they've come to the Earth, and yet I don't care. To me, that's a fascinating stance.
There's no question about that. And I wanted to ask you this. A couple of weeks ago, had Jacques Vallée on the show, and he said something in passing that everybody caught it, and I just let it go. I didn't want to. Anyway, this is what he said. I'm going to paraphrase here, but Jacques Vallée on this very program said, yes, there have been crash retrievals by the government, and blah blah blah. It was in the middle of a sentence, and Jacques, I think we've all been waiting for him to say something like that over the years. He's always, been a step on the other side of it without going into official confirmation. But that was a pretty dramatic statement by Jacques, if you take it at face value. Did your father?
Yeah, well, I got to say, Jacques is not someone, prone to flights of fancy.
That's right.
He's a very sober, perhaps the most knowledgeable person on the planet about UFOs. And, he has a PhD in artificial intelligence from Northwestern and a lifelong study of the field and so much credibility. So it's often, I find, if he'll mention something like that in passing, yeah, that becomes just utterly fantastic. And there's no more unimpeachable source I can think of than Jacques Vallée.
Except for your father. Did your father ever mention anything like that?
No, he didn't.
What was your father's position on Roswell?
Well, he investigated Roswell extensively, and he wasn't a fan of the overall government explanation of that it was the high altitude weather balloon. So yeah, he thought Roswell was a very interesting case. One of the interesting things about Roswell is that it really didn't public wasn't really aware of it till like 30 years later in the 70s. It wasn't it wasn't widely known in the 50s and 60s. And my father thought it was a very compelling case. If for no other reason, then you had the base commander saying, "Oh, hey, over here, folks, yeah, we caught a flying saucer." That doesn't happen every day.
Why was Roswell omitted in the official Air Force stance? Because you're absolutely right. Between 1947 and 1980, it was not mentioned anywhere in the public domain.
Yeah.
I have gone back, Paul, just so you know. I've gone back and listened to every popular radio show and television broadcast between 1947 and 1980, and there is not one mention of Roswell by anybody. Not Kehoe, not McDonald, not, it's not when they're talking about, Nazi UFOs, or they're talking about the 1952 flap, or whatever you want to bring up, these researchers over the year, nobody mentioned Roswell. And that's a fascinating aspect to pop culture that was effectively eliminated from the public domain.
Yeah, and you can say all kinds of things. Is it an entity from the government squelching that case from being disseminated? Because certainly it's caught on. It's probably the most famous UFO case of all time.
And your father, the reason why I bring it up directly is Jacques talking about crash retrievals and that they have happened. Your dad worked at Wright-Patt, where all of this is mentioned officially from the government side too, as well. This isn't anything that is conspiratorial. This is like real.
Right.
And this evidence was over Wright-Patt. Did your dad know about this?
I don't know exactly what he knew at the time. And something interesting I'd like to say about Wright-Patterson and also go back to Lieutenant Colonel Friend. We asked him, were alien bodies ever taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base?
Mm-hmm.
Just direct question.
Right.
And he said, no, alien bodies wouldn't be taken to Wright-Patt. That was a mechanical base. They would have been taken to Fort Hood, which was a burn center.
In Texas.
But notice he didn't broaden, because he knew what the intent of the question was. It wasn't really, were alien bodies taken to this base or that base, but did you see alien bodies? He didn't then go up a mile high and say, and yes, I saw alien bodies. He was under, non-disclosure for his life. And he was a very patriotic military man. And so he answered the question directly, but he avoided the spirit because that was his duty. But I asked him on his birthday party that I mentioned, while no one else was looking, I said, Lieutenant Colonel Friend, the son of your buddy, did you ever see anything super convincing? And he looks at me with this twinkle in his eyes, and he said, yes. And I found that to me, that's also one of the most compelling aspects of this whole phenomena, is a person like that who had a front row center seat to the phenomena, had no reason to lie to me, and got animated and excited when I asked him that question.
And as looking at it as a politician, he didn't say there wasn't any alien bodies, right?
Nope.
Which he could have said. Right.
I don't think he would lie, but he would, in good conscience, actively withhold information.
The twinkle of the eye, was that suggesting to you what we are all thinking?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I got chills down my spine, because here's a guy that I didn't even know was around until history rounded him up for the show. And my brother and Joel and I were so honored to meet with him, and then to see him again at his birthday party. To me, the guy is a legend, and he's sort of stepping out of the history books and, personal relationship with my father. And he told all these stories about my father that I didn't know. Here's a guy who, like Jacques Vallée, is unimpeachable as a source, who was around the phenomena directly, sent by the Air Force, just like my father, and hasn't gone on record saying, that UFOs are real or I've seen aliens. But I asked him, and he got excited about the answer in saying yes. And that was just a wonderful moment for me.
I wanted to ask you, today, the UFO community is so wonderful and so warm and so cool, and I just love hanging out and doing. Today, would your father be a part of our community? Would he embrace us?
Absolutely. He was a part of the UFO community for a long time, and he did UFO conferences, and there's I'll be at the UFO Con 2020 next week in San Francisco. He would have loved these because there is an open exchange of views, and the response I get from people because I'm his son is really gratifying, that they view him as somebody who really pushed the goalpost so far for this phenomena. I think he'd be very gratified. He'd love the fact, and with the internet now, my father's the first person who got me online in the 80s. But he would love what the internet has done for disclosure amongst individuals and agencies to spread the word. And I think he would be knee deep in the phenomena now and just very happy with the state of the overall UFO field and the people that are involved in it.
With the success of Project Blue Book, the series, can we anticipate and expect a season 3, 4, 5, and 6? I mean, there's enough case study and material there with 701 or whatever that number is to go into a couple of decades. Will we see a season 2, 3, 4, 5?
Well, so we're already, almost halfway into season 2, and I can't give away anything, but yes, there's a lot of excitement about it, and there's already initial ideas for subsequent seasons. Absolutely. This train has just barely left the station, and everybody involved with it is super excited. Okay, so season 3, we can expect to see the pipe. That's all I want to know. And speaking of Paula, actually, oh man, we're out of time. Okay, that's it. I'm going to blow through the commercial break. We'll do that in a minute. You grew up with Paula, and I asked you something off of the air. I want to ask you publicly right here. Yeah. Was she as cool back then as she is today? Paola Harris is one of the coolest people you'll ever meet, my friend. And you know that. She's an indefatigable researcher. She's been around the world. She's one of the people that does real research in the field. She's an author, a speaker, but I think she would identify herself mostly as a bona fide, legitimate scientific researcher. She worked with my father and the Center for UFO Studies. She's worked with Jacques Vallée, and in her own right, she is just a widely admired figure for the fact that she does, boots on the ground in remote parts of the world herself. She walks the walk.
She does. And I'm holding up to the cameras. You can't see this, Paul, but I'm holding up. This is an AI robot that Paula gave me this past weekend. And her, again, forward thinking, when her concern with AI and how this may involve the conversation of ET and extraterrestrials, of course. Yeah. Right. This is who she is. She is not going to slow down, is she?
No, she's only picking up speed. And I'll tell you, my view as a sort of teaser for her show in Laughlin in November is that, especially in the context of driverless cars, but also perhaps for UFOs, I might prefer artificial intelligence over human stupidity, because we are on a fast track to destroying this planet, and we might need help from anybody we can get it from.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. Paul, thank you so much, man. And it's going to be great hanging out with you all this year around the country. Thank you so much. Much success. And the next time you're on Fade to Black, which will be in a couple of months, we're going to take one subject and we're going to stay there. But tonight we had to do a little bit of everything, and it was just an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure, Jimmy.
Thank you so much, Paul Hynek. And we have up on Fade to Black, you can go and click. There is a link for Project Blue Book over at History Channel, and all of the episodes are there. Questions and the cast are all over on the links that we have up on Fade to Black right now. And I'll be right back after this short break. This is Fade to Black. Thank you so much to Paul Hynek. What a great conversation. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Stay with us.